If you are not married and sexually active or LGBTQ, you are still welcome into relationship with Jesus. There is room for you in the Christian conversation. Hi beautiful people! So for this week's video, there is so much information I want to give you, but I don't want to overwhelm you. So you and me talking openly and honestly about sexuality, about being Christian, about being LGBTQ, about purity culture is going to be an ongoing conversation. I have to be honest with you guys and admit, the more I delve into theology and biblical interpretation, the more I realize I know nothing at all. 1 Corinthians 8. We know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. Therefore, I am in a constant state of wonder and curiosity. The only thing I know for sure is that I love Jesus and I seek his heart every day. The rest of it, though, is confusing and complicated. That said, we're going to dive into one of the most confusing Christian topics, sexuality. We're gonna look at what other Christian YouTubers are saying, like Good Old Girl Defined, Paul and Morgan, and Emily Wilson. I know God is Gray is poised to be the most controversial because I not only disagree with purity culture, but I want it thrown in the garbage and burned in a dumpster fire. But God is Gray is not out here to be anti-save yourself from marriage or anti-God's design for sex. I simply do not believe that God's children should have ever been categorized as either sexually pure or sexually impure. I do not believe pieces of us are stolen or taken away with every sexual experience. We cannot be diminished in value. Ever. Jeremiah 31:3. I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness. Now, let's dive into a few YouTubers to look at their perspective on Christian sexuality, which will be a bit different than mine. First, let's do an easy one. Paul and Morgan. These are two young, newly-ish weds, and they are clearly into each other. These are the people at church who, when you're a virgin, drive you insane because they remind you how horny you are. They're on each other all the time. Don't get me wrong, I think that is awesome. When there is fire and chemistry, sex is amazing. Paul and Morgan look like they're really enjoying God's design. And their ministry is interesting because from my outside perspective, it looks like they're being really open and honest about their personal experiences. Paul was willing to forgive Morgan's sexual past despite him being a virgin, and I commend a Christian man for doing that. That is humble and awesome of Paul. And Morgan, she's got her heart on her sleeve and has been willing to tell her story. The main thing to note is that Paul and Morgan have successfully and beautifully fit into the ideal Christian scenario. They met young, they have fireworks of sexual chemistry, and luckiest of all, they're both straight. So they preach saving yourself from marriage in heterosexual union only. Second, we've got Girl Defined. If you're aware of Christian YouTube, you know Kristen and Bethany. I fully intend to review their new book, Sex, Purity, and the Longings of a Girl's Heart, because I am pretty sure I'll have lots to say. But in the meantime, all you need to know is that they both advocate for purity culture and, again, heterosexual union only. Kristen is a faithful wife of 7 years, I believe, and admittedly, Bethany didn't have it as easy when it came to the soulmate department. Bethany was frank about being a 30-year-old virgin, saving herself from marriage, and she's been vague about sexual struggles, which I think translate to masturbation, but I'm just making an assumption. Either way, she's now a newlywed, so the Girl Defined conversations have shifted from waiting to both being in heterosexual Christian marriages. And lastly, third, we've got Emily Wilson, who actually blew me away in her latest video.
The big old gift represents like the gift of your sexuality. When you start doing things sexually, like you just start to tear this gift apart. You know, like saying that when you give yourself away sexually, like you have nothing left to give. And I watched this go on in real time, like horrified. Just wanted to run on stage and scream and say like, this is not the way to approach this. Object-based metaphors for sexuality have done so much more damage than good.
Of these 3 channels, this is the first time I've noticed an earnest apology for purity culture. Emily, I am so grateful you made this video. You guys, I genuinely believe from the bottom of my heart that it is God's move that we as Christians are finally beginning to see the rotten fruit of our bad sexual doctrine. Luke 6:43, for a good tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. The church originally had what I believe were good intentions. They wanted to protect their youth groups from sexual heartbreak, from unwanted pregnancies, from STDs, etc. But where we planted a tree of comparing non-virgins to chewed up bubblegum or discarded chocolate bars, we grew the rotten fruit of sexual shame and anxiety. Where we planted trees of modesty culture and calling women stumbling blocks, we grew the rotten fruit of rape culture. Where we planted trees of homosexuality being an abomination, we grew the rotten fruit of chasing away the LGBTQ community or driving them to suicide. I don't care who argues with my concept of sexual integrity over purity. I just want all of us Christians to acknowledge bad fruit when we bite into it. With sex, we as the church can do so much better, and the time is now. I know for sure this will be controversial, but this portion is for any Christian or even guilt-ridden ex-Christian who is not married, sexually active, and/or LGBTQ. I truly believe one of the greatest tragedies of modern-day Christianity is how many of us have felt forced out of church or pushed away from our relationship with God because of our sexuality. The Bible makes it clear that all sins are equal, and yet the church has made an idol out of sexual purity. Purity and heterosexuality is still an idol on many Christian channels. My heart is that we restore truth and authenticity in these conversations. So here are my 4 tips on aligning your relationship with God with your sexuality. 1, this is a hard one, attempt a lightness of being. Romans 15:13, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. This may sound wild, but I've been practically bleeding sweat trying to figure out how to present this subject to you guys, and I heard God say, Brenda, lighten up. He reminded me that he is the divine author of everything, including sense of humor. When you read an amazing Reductress article, that is a reflection of God just as much as a beautiful waterfall. Having a buoyancy and lightness on the subject of sex is not about promoting promiscuity or not taking sex seriously, but it is about rejecting the doom and gloom and anxiety of hell. Sex is heavy and complicated enough without adding eternal damnation in the mix. So everyone, breathe. Lighten up. You're gonna be okay. 2, stop obsessing. Psalm 94:19. When anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought me joy. The biological, physical drive to have sex is real. Outside of the asexual community, it is a struggle to abstain. That said, it is worth considering that repression can give sex way too much power. Repression can make us compulsive. My DMs, for example, are full of men either screaming at me or asking me to confirm that masturbation is okay. First of all, masturbation is healthy, normal, and not anti-Christian. You can watch my video on this for more details. Second of all, if you haven't noticed, it's not sin, but the preoccupation with sin that makes us feel separate from God. When you are desperately repressing and then succumbing to that desire and then thinking God hates you, and then desperately repressing and succumbing to that desire and thinking God hates you, your relationship with God can become a mess. Why don't you try instead what I did, which is this. 3, have honest conversations with God. Romans 8:26. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. I'll keep saying the best thing we can do is to separate shame from conviction. Shame is a product of what other people have told us. Shame breeds anxiety and fear. Those are not of God. When God truly speaks, it's conviction. Conviction is a gentle whisper. It encourages you to do better. If you're sexually active, you can keep your blinders on. You can go and have sex and not bring a condom because you didn't want to premeditate sin. Or you can allow yourself to be in an abusive situation where someone is hurting your body because you feel like you deserve it or that God is punishing you. You can masturbate in shame. Or you can do those same things and invite God in. I invited God into my sexuality, and since doing so, I have made the healthiest choices of my life. I've asked God how to behave sexually. I've asked Him to show me when I could get hurt or when I am hurting others. And whether you believe I'm making the right choices or not, that is irrelevant. The most important thing is that you are pressing into relationship with God. Whatever you do, do not allow anyone to tell you that your sexuality separates you from God. Keep God in the mix of every aspect of your life, and then instead of tormenting yourself with a list of do's and don'ts, you will begin naturally making the best choices because you are planting trees of good communication with the Holy Spirit, of trusting yourself, of honoring your body and the body of others. Good fruit will grow, I promise you. And last but definitely not least, number 4. If you decide to be simultaneously Christian and sexually active, don't embrace hookup culture. Don't pretend sex is irrelevant or that the spiritual isn't involved. 1 Corinthians 6:19, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. The more I've allowed God into my sex life, the less I've desired promiscuity. I am not out here to shame anyone that's in that lifestyle. I've told you before, I was there. It's a fundamental part of my journey. But the more I've allowed God in, the more I've felt that gentle conviction. I don't ever want to use someone's body solely for my pleasure or self-esteem, and I demand the same for myself. And my last piece of advice is, if you are choosing to be sexual, don't allow experiences to knock you down and keep you down. Center yourself in your faith, in your inherent worth, and value. Don't let anyone's mistreatment of you make you second guess or question for a second God's magnificent love for you. So keep pressing into your relationship with God and keep it moving. I hope this helped you guys. Please comment below, stir conversation, and do it as if Jesus is in the room. Please don't be cruel to me. Let's just honestly and earnestly talk about our sexual experiences and what our view on this is, even if we disagree with each other. And that's it. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, donate to my Venmo or Patreon if you can. I love you guys. God bless.